How we doing? How's everybody doing, huh? Thank you so much for having me today and having me back. I was here last year, and while last year was wonderful and unique and different in terms of the venue, I think you could all agree that this is something that I think is bigger and better. And they got a water park. I don't know if you saw that. So if you're going to partake in that, make sure that it's after you do what you're doing here. I think you'll also agree with me that this is a wonderful opportunity, incredible value to meet people in our industry, to make connections, and to have those conversations, whether it's last night at dinner or at the bar, or obviously in the more formal event that we have here. Shortly, we're going to have the privilege of having Don up here and hearing from somebody who has been incredibly influential in terms of the growth of soccer, the perception of soccer, not just in the United States, but the perception from outside of the United States. But before we sit down and have a longer conversation, it is my incredible honor and privilege to introduce the recipient of the Duncan Revy Award for 2019. As we all know, this is named after Soccerex's late founder, who had that incredible drive and that passion that had such an incredible impact on our industry. And so this award recognizes individuals and organizations out there that share some of those same traits and have had that same type of impact. As Duncan changed the world of soccer for the better, we find individuals and we find organizations that do the same thing. The winner of this year's 2019 Duncan Revy Award also has changed, as I said, the landscape of soccer, the way we think about soccer here in the United States for the better part of 2 decades. What Don Garber has done has been pretty phenomenal in terms of the growth of Major League Soccer, and directly and indirectly the growth of soccer in the United States and North America. And as I said, the perception of soccer from the outside, and we talk about perception a lot of times, has changed and improved so much under his direction. As I said, he has led Major League Soccer for over 2 decades to unprecedented growth. And as we award him this incredible honor, I want to bring up somebody to help with the recipient and to honor him, John Kelleher, the CEO of Soccerex's global partner, Totem Sport. Will you come up, John?
Thanks, Alexi. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very proud that Totem Sport is a global partner of Soccerex, and hopefully for many, many years to come. It is a massive honor to be asked to present this award to somebody who is so deserving of it. But before I present it, I'd like to give everybody a reminder of why he is deserving of that award.
It's such a technical.
And we both agreed that Don would be a great candidate.
I met Don 22 years ago, and I was impressed. Slowly it began to work as we began to build the number of soccer teams in the country.
When I first contemplated coming to the league, Don made me really believe that there's exciting times ahead.
I think the relationship he has developed with the broadcasters has shown them what a viable product this was. He evangelized the whole concept of soccer and TV in America. And I think the networks have now seen how to monetize it in a way that suits their purposes. Broadcasting anything, it's about star power.
It's hard to quantify what Don has meant to Major League Soccer since he came on board in 1999. I think he has made people appreciate what this sport can be in this country. Just thinking about the diversity in the ownership group and how that has grown is a testament to what Don's been able to do.
The
the biggest thing is being able to give back. And I think, obviously, with Don setting up MLS Works, I think that was a big part of what people are going to look back on. They will turn around and say that whole program was Don's vision, and that's a huge part of his legacy.
I would give Don a lot of credit, more than anyone else, for building the sport of soccer in the United States.
Don, it's my pleasure and privilege.
Thank you, John. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Let me just make a couple of comments. I was not aware of the video, so it's humbling to see one person getting recognized for the success of a movement, and that movement really is the drive of a bunch of really committed owners, and Jorge recently joining the group, who had, like Robert Kraft and Phil Anschutz, Lamar Hunt, the vision and the desire to build a soccer nation in our country. Without ownership that believes, you can't really get a bunch of executives like myself and the hundreds of league executives and the thousands of club executives to come together and drive a plan that delivers really on the hopes and dreams of what really has been a market that was craving Division I men's soccer to be what it has become today. So while when I was asked to speak with Alexi, I wasn't aware of the award, I'm really honored to accept it. Duncan was somebody that really had a great love of our sport, and the idea of Soccerex coming to the United States is something that's really beneficial to all of us in our country that are continuing to drive, whether it's the women's game, whether it's the game at the confederation level or at the national team level, trying to just grow. And the fact that we have most of the people here that are representing the international football community, I think gives all of us the opportunity to share best practices and take this massive country of ours with 350 million people and incredibly diverse and really loving the game and wanting the game to continue to grow, having all of us work together to see how we could achieve that on behalf of all those fans that crave it. So to the Soccerex folks, I really appreciate it, and honored and humbled. So thank you.
All right, we're gonna go over here.
I'll give that to you.
Come here. Hold on to that. There we go.
Thanks.
All right. All right, now we're going to talk. We're going to sit and talk. All right? Use the middle ones. There we go. Is that hair I saw in that video?
Was,
Wow.
that's when you know you've been in the
Like
job.
a hippie back then. Big old beard, hair flying all over the place.
That's when you know you've been in the job a long time.
Let's break some news right off the bat here, Don. Because, we sit down and we talk about these things, and I know how much you like to break news. So confirm for me a rumor. I got my ear to the ground. Confirm for me a rumor, okay? There will be an MLS team in Miami starting next year. Yes or no?
Yes, there will be a team in Miami.
That's what I like to hear. That's what I like to hear. I was so confident that I wore my pink. We can't wait. It's going to be wonderful. Congratulations on the 2 decades of success that you have had. And since we have already had MLS Cup, we've already had an expansion draft. As far as I'm concerned, even though we're not into 2020, we are in our 25th year, and the celebration comes. So let's do it from a macro perspective first, and then we'll dig down to some other things. And we will take questions at the end. So if you have them, keep them hot and ready. When you look at the last 25 years for Major League Soccer, in big picture type of stuff, what makes you proud about what has happened with Major League Soccer?
It starts, Alexi, with the original owners had a dream that we could be leading this movement of trying to build this country as a soccer nation, and professional soccer, as it does around the world, has to drive that. You need to have billions of dollars of investment in infrastructure, in marketing and programming. You've got to hire the right people to create all of the energy that will be kind of what has been achieved in MLS today. So what I think makes me proudest is the fact that 25 years after the original founding, we have teams that matter in soon to be 30 markets. We've got players that have made MLS a league of choice and have desired to be here. As you and I have talked about many times, we've created jobs for thousands and thousands of people that are working in professional soccer in their country. They grew up with the game, and now they have an opportunity to be employed in the game. And the near 700 players that are in our league each year, as you know well, Alexia, we've been working to ensure that they can continue their careers. And I think if I had to pick one thing, I guess it'd have to be two. It's being in Banc of California Stadium yesterday and being there with Enrique Bonilla from Liga MX and a bunch of media people and seeing an absolute cathedral for our sport. And then being around a bunch of our ex-players that are now MLS greats like Landon and Kobe Jones that can be part of sort of celebrating the next generation of what MLS can become. And I just have to say on behalf of all of us that are around it, nobody expected it to happen. So it's actually really good to be in a position where you could sit next to somebody in a plane and not have to hear that soccer will never make it in America. And I used to get that every day. And now basically as I'm flying to LA, you have three people pulling me aside and saying, hey, I'm an LAFC season ticket holder, or I'm a Galaxy fan, and I was out El Tráfico. And that's not something that happened 5 years ago, let alone 25 years ago.
So it's easy and good that we get to talk about these positive things, but you also know that, and everybody here knows that the business of soccer in the United States oftentimes is a slog, in the best way, because it's a labor of love, but it's not all wine and roses, and we all understand that there are challenges along the way. When you look back at the 25 years, and certainly the 20 years that you've involved, do you have some pivotal points where there were massive challenges? I know you lived through the contraction early on in your tenure and stuff like that. So are there some things out there, because it's, best practices are all fine and well, but also hearing some of the challenges and maybe even some of the failures along the way is important to understand who you are, understand where the league is.
Yeah, it's a good question, Alex. You know, this is my 20th year, so I've been doing some media and talking about what's happened over the last 20 years that have been the more difficult moments. And I'll pick the first one. I came into the league, I was a young guy, knew very little about the sport. The league was just kind of getting its legs. It built its first stadium in Columbus in 1998. We had 12 teams. 3 of them were operated by the league. Mm-hmm. And I came from another league, and I meet with Mark Abbott, who was one of the founders. And Mark was the president and general manager, really not the president, but the pseudo-general manager of 3 teams. So he wanted to do a trade, he'd have to go from one side of his office to the other and trade a player from Tampa to San Jose. That's a joke, that really didn't happen. But ultimately, it just didn't make sense. We had to get out of owning and operating teams. We had to figure out a way to expand. We had to figure out a way to actually build stadiums and build infrastructure, create a vision for academies, get a television deal where we'd get paid to be on the air. And it was clear that in that moment, that was not going to happen without some traumatic experiences. We went through a dynamic of folding teams, of refinancing or recapitalizing the league. We had to take 5 steps back to take a couple steps forward. Not only do we have to raise another several $100 million to operate the league, but we then went out and started Soccer United marketing and bought the English language World Cup rights from FIFA, and got our owners to commit to building stadiums, and those were $1 billion of commitments. But in order to do that, we went through near bankruptcy discussions. Contraction was complicated and was heartbreaking, but sometimes you got to cut off, some challenging parts of your body in order to, to move forward positively. And then that led really the next generation of success. We brought in 2 new teams in 2005. We started a path to expansion. We opened up what was then the Home Depot Center, as you know, 2003, and it kind of was off to the races after that.
Did you predict it? Did you? I mean, in your wildest dreams?
No, I did in Alexi. I went through that again. I was a young guy. I left another league where I had a good career, and I figured the worst case scenario would be a good business school study, and I'd learn from it. I will tell you that when Phil Anschutz and Robert Kraft and Lamar Hunt, who was alive at that time, they really believed. And they said, if we are focused, if we get energized on making some tough decisions and making some broader financial commitments, we'll get through it. and it was from 2001 till 2005 before we expanded. And just for numbers, that was a $5 or $6 million expansion fee for Real Salt Lake and Chivas USA, and the next round of expansion will be north of $300 million, and that's 14, 15 years later. So it was a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity in a short period of time.
All right, well, we're going to skip around here to keep you on your toes and to keep everybody interested in stuff like that. Zlatan, was it worth it?
Absolutely.
Why?
You know, Zlatan is, I knew you'd ask that question. I was trying to think of something.
You wrote it for me, so.
I could. No, I didn't. My PR guy wrote it. The great, important PR guy. You know, Zlatan is just, he's a transformational character. And by the way, he did really well on the field for us. I've had some of the most fun meetings I've ever had in my career, sitting in a restaurant with him in LA and trying to tell me that, what was wrong with American sport, what was wrong with Major League Soccer, but he actually is a really bright guy and had a great vision for what he thinks soccer can be here and around the world. He's performed some amazing acts on the field that have resonated around the world, but at the end of the day, the Galaxy make the decision as to whether or not he's going to win games for them, and their coach and their GM decided he wasn't, but we'll miss him. He was great.
The business of soccer obviously entails negotiations, and sometimes negotiations that are easy, sometimes that are harder. We know that from a negotiation standpoint, the CBA is up, and therefore negotiations with the MLSPA are already underway. First and foremost, do you anticipate the league starting on time next year? And two, and I know, look, it's a negotiation, so there's only so much you can give away, but how positive are you in terms of how these negotiations are going to go from your side?
Well, I always go into every negotiation with the desire to reach a deal, and whether it's a media negotiation or it's an investor, potential expansion negotiation, a negotiation with the city to try to get public funding for a stadium, or certainly with our players union. This will be our third CBA deal. I have all the expectations that we'll reach a deal. They're never easy, they're never fun. It's not the best part of running a sports league, but we've got smart people on our end. I have a lot of respect for the increased level of expertise and energy with the players union. A good, strong union is going to make a good, strong league. The fact that we're talking about charter travel, to think about that 20 years ago is really mind-boggling. We've got issues that we need to get through. I'm confident we'll get through them. I'm confident we'll start the league on time.
We were talking last night at the bar, and I would pepper you with questions and hypotheticals and stuff like that. And a lot of times in your answer, you couched it with, because our research says that. And I know Major League Soccer, as all leagues and all businesses out there, rely heavily on the research. Can you talk a little bit about what Major League Soccer is doing and how it guides a lot of the decisions both on and off the field?
I think any business that is trying to reach a dynamic with a consumer, right? Not consumers or fans, or a dynamic with a partner, in this case, broadcasters and sponsors, really need to understand the data that's going to drive that offering. And in the early days of MLS, I think it's interesting for anybody that's involved in the sport, you had original owners that had a certain point of view about what we should spend on players or what our strategy should be. You had big markets, you had small markets, and our board meetings and committee meetings were about a lot of people yelling at each other. And the league, I was the arbitrator, if you will, the mediator of all sorts of conflict. And we finally said, let's make decisions based on what it is that our fans want from us so that we can grow our audience. That started with the designated player rule. We just didn't sit down and say David Beckham wanted to be in the league. We went out to our fans who said the league's growing. We had more and more U.S. national team players. We had fewer big-name international players. And our research said we're playing the FIFA EA game where we're getting exposed to the game globally. Go out and bring in some international players. We had to figure out a way to do that and still manage a reasonable approach to our player spending, and we created a new rule that's been very effective called the Beckham rule, but it was before we knew David wanted to be in the league. As you know, Ivan Gazidis and I and Tim Lewicki went out and met with David and his wife and tried to convince him to come in, and that led a movement of lots of designated players. A number of years ago, we went out and tried to figure out this will be interesting to people here. What does the soccer market in North America look like? How many fans are there? What do they care about? What leagues do they follow? The idea was professional soccer watchers tuning in and turning up to games. What motivates them? What inspires them? What do they like about MLS? What do they want to see more or less of? What do they think about the game internationally? And that research, which was with the Boston Consulting Group, which was a expensive, near 2-year-long project, basically sized the audience and segmented the audience and told us which groups of people, what those groups of people think about. And that motivates our thinking in almost everything we do. Yesterday's League of Mex announcement on our All-Star game came out of research that said there are a lot of fans that want to measure us referentially against competition that mattered, in this case, our closest rivals in Mexico. They wanted to see more players that, as we talked about last night, could make a difference. And that's where the allocation money, the targeted allocation money strategy came out that brought in a number of American players from overseas and young international players. And almost everything we do is driven by research. I can't imagine why any company would try to make decisions without understanding what your audience, what your current fans or future consumers want to see from you.
A lot of your legacy, in a good positive way, is going to be directly related to the incredible expansion that you have led. Where does it stop? How does it stop?
You know, I get asked that question a lot, Alexi. I thought it would stop at 20. At 20, we were going to be the largest league in the world, and then at 22, we were the largest league in the world. We have 24 teams in now. We'll have 6 new teams coming in over the next number of years. And that's been driven by this demand in the marketplace that didn't exist 5 years ago or 6 years ago. It certainly didn't exist 10 years ago. Austin, Texas was not a market that we thought would be a thriving soccer market. They have 30,000 season ticket deposits on a stadium that'll open in 21 of 20,000 seats, which was unimaginable 3 years ago. So there's a lot of demand for the sport in our country. I think that demand's being met by our league, by the USL, by the NWSL, and nothing could be more positive than having massive amounts of investment in the game professionally to drive it from the bottom up, from academy perspective, and the top down. So the short answer to it is 30 teams is what we will be ultimately granting soon. The 30th team is going to get announced before the end of the year.
You can do it here.
No, I can't do it here, but that would be something you'd like, wearing your Fox hat. And I think that's where we need to stop. There are a lot of things that need to happen to onboard 5 teams over the next number of years, 7 new stadiums coming in that period of time. I think it's very important to note that as I talk to a lot of the international leagues, you know, a lot of friends of ours are working in the Premier League. You could be a Premier League player or executive and go to a game and be home for dinner that night. Our Vancouver team travels 60 to 70,000 miles a year, and they're only chartering 4 or 5 times a year. So our country is massive. It crosses 3 time zones, massive climate zones. So a larger league is necessary for just the mass of the United States and Canada. So 30 is right. 32 could happen at some point, but I don't think it's happening anytime soon.
Well, Alejandro Bedoya, I saw him last night, so he's somewhere and he just heard that. So I think your charter thing for negotiation, it's done deal, right? That's what I heard you say.
Well, you know,
So the distance to travel. Don't worry.
Negotiate our CBA right in front of.
All right. Speaking of negotiations, 2022, the broadcast rights go up, and the media landscape. We talk about it constantly. We're both involved for it. How do you see that playing out? What do you see, both from an MLS perspective and maybe from a bigger picture perspective, on what the media landscape looks like as it relates to soccer?
So that's a fascinating thing for all of us, right? From you as a broadcaster and everybody here in this room. There is more soccer/football on television in the United States than any other sport by a long shot. In terms of the NFL, the NBA, National Hockey League, and baseball, by a long shot. So that's really positive. The fact that there's massive disruption going on in this environment, I think, is also positive. So the idea that disruption is going to have a negative impact on content holders, I think, is just not true. That's evidenced by our new deal with ESPN+. It could not be more positive for us. We have more people watching our games, watching them where they want to watch them, how they want to watch them, doing it in a way that is entirely married with the vision of Disney Disney or the vision of Fox or the vision of Univision. So as all of our young fans, and we have the youngest fan base in all of professional sports, are either cable cutters or cable nevers, as they go and travel into a new over-the-top environment, as our new television deal goes up, instead of just having to negotiate with my great partner in Fox, we'll now have the opportunity to negotiate with 10 potential providers who are all looking to get a close relationship, an addressable relationship with the consumer that ultimately is going to have a lifelong relationship with that company. So it is incredibly exciting for all of us, not just Major League Soccer. The future is bright from a content and media perspective, in my opinion.
You've mentioned the diversity of ownership and how important that has been and the real positive that has brought and the progress that it has brought. With that diversity comes even individual owners that are involved in women's soccer and NWSL and the relationship that you have. Do you see in the future a more direct relationship between Major League Soccer and the women's game?
Well, I'll start with the comment on the first, and I'll go to the second. The MLS is what it is, not just as commissioners speak, Alexi, because you've been around as long as I have. It's driven by our ownership and now the diversity of thought that exists around our board table. So you bring in a guy like Jorge and his family and his partners, their view and perspective of what they can do to build a sport in this very, very important global market is going to help Major League Soccer grow in so many different ways. So as expansion happens and you get more fans and more facilities and more academies, and Jorge will talk about their $110 million temporary stadium, which is a larger investment than probably 4 of our original stadiums. That is what's driving the future of the sport here for everybody. And as they come in, they're bringing in a new energy beyond not just Division I soccer, but our relationship with the USL. 4 of our owners are involved in the NWSL. I think more will come in the future. And as we start thinking about if you build billions of dollars of investment and you have an equal amount of investment in expertise at the club level and at the league level, it's hard to imagine that we won't be more involved in women's soccer. There's lots of things that are going on in that environment. The NWSL is experiencing growth and transition as they move from U.S. Soccer being a manager to figuring that out on their own. But I do think that there will be a future with Major League Soccer in the women's game.
A couple more questions. And going back to expansion. Expansion fee, what are we looking at now? 300,000? 300? No, 300,000, that'd be easy, right? 300 million?
You could buy that. You could buy a team.
Are we in the 300 million range?
We are in the $300 million range. Yeah.
Really?
I think we'll be north of 300 million for the next team.
Can you just break it down a little bit, because obviously that's just the expansion fee. The amount of money and the outlay from an ownership perspective is much more in that. You mentioned some of the facilities and the situation like that. Can you break it down for folks a little bit in terms of what is needed? And obviously different markets are different, but in general, what is needed from an owner in Major League Soccer?
So, I just want to make a point for, again, so many different people that are thinking about their leagues, their experience here in this country. MLS, no different than the NFL or baseball, whatnot, it's an entity, right? And that entity shares in different levels in national revenues. So when you bring in more members of your partnership, the existing members get diluted, and they get diluted forever. So expansion fees compensate for that dilution. It also drives increased, the value of a team changes based on the size of the business and the future outlook on the business. So expansion fees rise as team values and enterprise values rise, and the expectations for what it could be for the future continue to grow. I think it's very different here than the rest of the world because of the fact that there is no end to what the opportunity here is in North America. We still are in the earliest phases of growth, and I think our best days are still ahead. So that's why there's so much energy on expansion, Alexi. But what is the most shocking to me, I should have said it when you asked the original question. So the guys in Sacramento, for example, or in St. Louis or in Cincinnati are spending $200 million to get into the partnership, and then spending $300 million building a stadium. So now an MLS team owner is looking at a $500 to $600 million investment in building sport just in their city. And that includes the training grounds that they're building. I hope Jorge can talk about what they're doing just outside the airport here. We have 30, 40, 50, 60, $70 million training facilities that when you were running the Red Bulls or the LA Galaxy were just unimaginable, with 7 fields, 10 fields, and proper training grounds that rival some of the other teams and leagues around the world. And that's what's going to take this country to another level so that we could start creating dozens and dozens of Christian Pulisic's and dozens of Alphonso Davies in Canada. And the women's side, if there's the proper alignment, just thinking about hundreds and hundreds of professionally developed athletes, which we're now just beginning to tap into, that costs a lot of money, which is why we need Fox and ESPN and Univision to pay us a lot of money in 2023.
Well, a couple more questions here, just 2 more questions, and then we'll open it up. What irritates you? I talked a little bit about perception and the changing of perception, both globally and at home. What irritates you when people say things about the league, either stuff on the field or off the field? What irritates you, either because it's not true, or it's not based in reality, or it just irritates you?
Well, a lot, right? And I think you'd see that for anybody who's running a league in any league around the world, or certainly here in the United States. But I think that irritation is driven by a reaction to the passion that fans and media have for our sport. So the pundit today doesn't work for the New York Times or doesn't work for Fox. They have a blog or they have their own growing social media presence, and for the most part have, I think this is positive, hopefully, if it's properly managed, a platform to be able to communicate their points of views. And sometimes those points of views are represent a very narrow perspective. And the elevation of that platform, particularly in a politically charged environment, is creating challenges for leagues and really challenges for all countries, all companies to figure out a way to manage through. Less about irritation, probably more about concern. If it was an irritation, I think it's less in this group, right? Because MLS is more respected globally than it is here. And part of that is because there's a schism between, as we did our BCG research, the soccer purist who is following the international game and will never rate a domestic league because of whatever reason. So that compared to the born and bred MLS fan or NWSL fan or USL fan that is connected to the sport through their love of their team. And that has become less and less of an issue because the number of purists, albeit with a loud megaphone, is really, really small compared to the larger audience of people that are engaged. So ultimately, we can talk all day about irritation.
Does that just change with time? I mean, when people outside of the country and outside of the league have a better perception of the league than people in the countries when it comes to Canada?
I think it does, Lexi. It's not something you and I have talked about. I mean, speak to foreign players. Jorge, who won't talk about it, will talk about the number of world-class players who've called him to come into the league. And he may or may not want them to come into the league based on whatever their strategy is. The credibility and respect for players abroad is remarkable. Think about the World League Forum, which was formed by the Premier League, by the Bundesliga, Liga MX, and MLS, that organized a lobbying effort for all of the leagues to have standing at FIFA. And I sit on the Football Stakeholders Committee at FIFA, which is shocking, because I could assure you 5 years ago, nobody thought that an American could actually be part of the governance of the rules of football, the things that actually matter as it relates to competitive rules and agent relationships, the international match calendar, and the like. So I think as more and more international influence happens here, probably politically and through the growth of our, hopefully, success internationally, which needs to improve, I think that changes.
All right, last question. While you maybe weren't a soccer guy when you started with MLS, you are certainly a soccer guy right now, and you think about the game. So as we go into the 25th anniversary and the celebration of this league 25 years in, let's put something in a time capsule right now. What does this league look like 25 years from now, ideally, from your perspective? Not just fantasy, but what realistically do you think it can look like?
I think this is a quintessential American quality, right? I think our fans, our partners, and our investors do not want to be operating an emerging league. They want to be operating one of the best leagues in the world. And that's why our vision, and you're aware of this, Lexi, is to be one of the top leagues in the world, because the consumer here will not accept anything less. They'll be patient as we get there, but they want to know that we have a North Star, and that North Star is going to be competitive with the rest of the world. That's going to take time. And time is really the most important factor. No matter what we do, if we want to manage a rational business, that we're not going to be able to accelerate that faster than the natural evolution and the momentum that'll happen in this part of the world. And 2026 will help get us there a little bit faster. I think the league will not be much bigger than we are at 30, so it could be maybe one or two more. I think without doubt we will be competing for the best players in the world in the prime of their careers. And I believe without doubt that the American player 20, 25 years from now, based on all the investment and in academy programs and development and coaching development, and mostly the cultural changes that are going to happen, that are going to drive great athletes to want to play our sport as opposed to other sports, we're now going to have a global market for American players that'll raise the profile of our league, raise the profile of our national teams, and ultimately, hopefully, we're going to be winning a World Cup. And if all of that happens, then all of us in the room are going to be feeling pretty good about it.
Take some questions?
Sure.
All right. I think we have a microphone out there. There we go. I can see it. Young man in the back there. Just raise your hand if you do have a question. There's someone in the front here coming to get you. Stand up. Tell us who you are, your sign, what your loves, your losses, whatever.
Yes, I'm Pascal. I'm French. I'm from Bordeaux. Fantastic soccer club in France, of course. But I live in San Francisco also, and I have a couple of questions. I mean, one main question. One remark first, if you want to run to become an American president, you need to spend $600 million. So you have the choice between becoming an American president or being an owner of the Major League Soccer. So it's good to know the number. My question is, in the US, you have incredible number of people that plays at a younger age, probably more that play soccer than any other sport in this country. Then you have unbelievable women's soccer team. Then you have generational team like Alexis, when they played, and we were lucky enough to have those great players on the field. But it seems that in between, there is nothing really happening. We don't hear about the draft. We don't hear about the U16, U17, U18, U19. And when you talk about building soccer in the US, I think it starts by building also the player, and what's your idea of what is the university college role in how do you bring those players and those talent to the level that it will require to build the MLS in the years to come?
So it's a good question. I'm going to give you a little bit of a long answer, and it's probably the first time I've ever talked about it, because I think it's the culmination of a year's work that our technical people have done to try to get an understanding as to why we're not developing enough world-class players. I'll start with, we determined a couple of years ago that we had a coaching issue at the youth level, and we, the league, couldn't really do anything more than manage that within our clubs. So we went to Clairefontaine, and we had all of our which is the French academy that develops their youth development program, and we made all of our academy players get a certificate for Clairefontaine, and they still need to do that now. Then we went out and we hired Fred Lipka, who was the head of development for Clairefontaine, and he now runs youth development for Major League Soccer. Then we went out and did some research to try to understand what's happening in the actual numbers of kids that are playing. And there is a misperception that there are all these 20, 30, 50 million people playing soccer. They might be kicking the ball around at 4 or 5 years old, but the number of elite players is very small. And part of that is, in our culture here, we have this unique way of managing pay-for-play, or our families having to go through pay-for-play, and we're deciding at 7 years old or 8 years old that some kid is going to go play travel soccer, and we're determining at 7 that he's going to be a player that's going to be an elite player. And the rest of the world, they continue to come into the system. And we're not allowing kids to have the opportunity to continue to come into the system at 8 and 9 and 10 and 12 years old. And we've got to figure out a way to fix that. We've got to figure out a way to work with our federation, I'll just talk about on the boys and men's side, to put more money and more resources into developing players in a world-class fashion. And I think that's an investment that Major League Soccer is willing to make. And then I think we need to recognize the fact that look at the performance that we've been having and recognize that we're not doing as well as we need to do. And from our perspective, looking at the number of world-class players that are being developed in the US and sold versus the rest of the world, it's a handful. And when you have all these people living in our country and playing, that's unthinkable to me. Something is wrong, and it's something that we need to fix. So you should know we're focused on it.
Other questions? Anybody out there? Anybody out there? Here in the front there, I think, yeah.
Good morning, Ken Russo with Russo Soccer. Don, I have a question for you with regard to the calendar. I know there's been a lot of talk in the past that certain owners might be in favor of an adjustment of the calendar to kind of compete with in order to compete better for example, European players. And as you just mentioned a couple of minutes ago, as our game develops here and more American and Canadian players come into, demand in the primes of their careers, would it make sense to revisit the adjustment of the calendar to align it with Europe?
So if when Alexis said what are the things that are challenges, the list is too long to go through in the 30 minutes we have. But on the top of the list, in the top 5, is managing our schedule. We have this unique situation where, again, time zones and weather, we can't manage a calendar that the rest of the world manages simply because of weather. We had new teams that are coming in north that are cold market cities. We have new teams coming in the southern part of North America. That's a big part of our strategy. How could we have more games in the early part of the winter in warm weather markets so that we can have fewer games in Toronto and in Chicago, et cetera, et cetera. We're also adding more teams, which is broadening our schedule. We have a big commitment to the CONCACAF Champions League, to this new Leagues Cup we have with Mexico, Lamar Hunt US Open Cup and the Canadian Championship. And for the most part, it's hard to play twice a week. So as we continue to grow and have priorities, the schedule is the most complicated thing that we have to manage through. So we ended earlier and we'll start earlier this year than ever before. We're going to see how that goes. We're still in a growing, emerging league. We have a new playoff format that just changed this year, the highest ratings and highest attendance that we've ever had, so it was a good move. But we ended a month earlier to stay out of the NFL schedule. It grew our ratings and grew our excitement, but now some of our teams are going to have a longer period of time. One of our coaches made a great comment about how he thought that was really bad, and that was an expensive comment that he made. So, ultimately, we've got to manage through it. It's difficult.
Do you have any research as to what would be lost if you did change the season and the schedule?
I mean, it's less about research, Alexi. It's more about tracking the data of attendances based on certain weather. So in Seattle, people are going to go to games in rain, snow, sleet, or shine. They're going to do that in Portland, probably do that in Kansas City. They're going to do that in many markets. They're going to do that in Atlanta. Obviously we have a special facility there. I think as our league continues to grow, you think of the NFL, people are going to go through thick or thin. And I think as we build deeper relationships in the community and stronger fan bases, I do think that we're going to be able to move into more inclement weather months, and we'll be able to power through that.
Last question. Anybody out there? Anybody out there? Anybody?
In the back,
Is there one in the back? You see, there we go, way back. Good-looking young man in the back there. All right.
You see youth in the MLS. What do you see play any role in development?
Come closer so we can maybe get...
So the microphone here. Hi, I'm curious, do you see technology play a role in youth development in the US? And if so, what type of technology do you see MLS investing in the future?
So you broke up on the first part of the question. So repeat it again if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, so I was curious, see technology play a role in youth development in the US? And if so, what type of technology do you see yourself investing in?
So, the answer is yes. And just to give you a sense as to how we think, rather than just, take inbound, meetings with all the tech companies, we actually went out and invested in an incubator that's managed out of an agency in New York. And one of the remits we gave them was find for us technology startup programs that exist around the world that are thinking about ways that we could analyze data, for example, on player development. And that company, that entity goes out and speaks to 1,000 startups, and then they vet them all down, and we end up meeting with 4 or 5 or 10 of them, and then we have an opportunity with them and others to invest in it. And a couple of technology opportunities came out of that. That was so successful, we got UEFA and all the other leagues, and Fox, by the way, to do an accelerator that is doing something similar on a handful of other technology opportunities for us. So there is no aspect of our business with technology is not an important part of it. We've just, I don't know that we've announced it, but we've just done a deal with Second Spectrum to try to figure out ways that we could utilize video. We have wired all of our stadiums with panoramic cameras. A lot of that started with security, but a lot more of that is the capability to capture data in our games and in and around our games. We're going to do that in our training grounds. So technology is going to be a big driver of our business for all leagues, all sports teams.
Thank you for the question. Don, thank you for the time. I think you'd agree with me that whether you're a commissioner of Major League Soccer or you're just starting out with a dream and a hope and you have a display and you're selling your wares out there, we all know that it's difficult. We all know that it is a slog, but we also know that it is a labor of love for a sport that we all love. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for everything that you've done. Congratulations on a couple decades and onward and upward. Thank you very much.